Welcome, everyone. I'm Cecilia Ziniti with Replit, and this is the Replit AI podcast. We're really lucky today to be joined by Paige Bailey and Michele Catasta. I'll give a brief intro of them. Welcome, Paige and Michele. So Paige Bailey, streaming live from the ICML conference in beautiful Hawaii, where a lot of our industry's luminaries are gathered this week. She's the product lead for generative models at Google DeepMind. So she oversees things like Palm and Gemini. And previously, she's been driving Alphabet's code AI efforts, both for internal and external use cases. Google being one of the biggest code bases in the world, this is a big job. Before she returned to Alphabet, Paige was the product lead for ML and machine learning ops at GitHub. So she's been focused on code and AI applications surrounding code for some time. Prior to that, she was a machine learning engineer at Microsoft and Chevron, and we're very lucky to be joined by Paige. Welcome, Paige.
Thank you so much for having me. I am a huge fan of Replit, especially the new AI-enabled features that y'all have enabled in the IDE, and very excited to have this collaboration between the Bard team and Alphabet's large language models team.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Paige. And then in a slight role reversal, we've got our typical moderator, Michele Catasta, Replit's VP of AI, as a panelist this time. So you all know, and I hope love Michele, but he is the VP of AI at Replit, as well as an investor and general member of the AI community. Michele was formerly the head of applied research at Google Labs, where, as previously mentioned, with that huge code base, he had a large focus on software development, and how AI really is perfectly applied to these use cases. His expertise is in AI for code and LLMs, which is a perfect setup for today's chat. We're going to be focused on a little bit about Replit and Bard partnership. We're going to talk about some of the latest models. You're going to hear some fun stories about craziness, which I won't spoil too much, but you will hear about those. And we're just super excited. So a little bit about me. I'm just the moderator, but I run the various business teams at Replit, and I've been in AI for some time. One of my early roles in AI was on the founding team on Alexa at Amazon. They've had some interesting announcements this week about sort of catching up and bringing, AI to more experiences in that way. So excited to dig in here at Replit. We have kind of been thinking about AI a long time, enough to start a podcast on it. But also, we have a large user base working with Ghostwriter and making improvements every day. So we're very kind of interested in the applied side. So excited to dive in. All right. So reason for this podcast, or one of the however you say that. So Google and Replit announced a partnership this March. More recently announced work on Bard. Can you tell us a little bit about that partnership? What is it, Paige?
So Bard is Google's sort of chat-like interface on top of some of our most compelling large language models. You can think of it as a way to kind of help you sort of be creative as a thought partner as you're thinking about working through some of your projects, as a helpful assistant as you're planning out birthdays or travel itineraries, lots of different things. And since Bard was released towards the beginning of the year, we've been implementing a lot of really interesting features. So things like code support, multimodal support, and then also things like an integrated Python execution environment. So you can ask questions, Python code is generated behind the scenes, and then it functions as kind of a tool, a calculator to give you better insights and better answers. There are also kind of extensions, plugins coming along the way. So lots of features getting produced very rapidly. But one of the things that we were most excited about is that, as a software engineer, you might be thinking about a problem, you might be wanting to kind of imagine what a particular app might look like, or how to get started with a project. And as a result, the large language model might give you some code. And then that's great, but code in isolation isn't really very useful. You would probably want to pull it into an IDE, start experimenting with it right away. And so almost, like the first two things that came to mind when we were building out this export capability were Colab and Replit. And so I think the team has been super fans of Replit for a very long time. And so giving people the ability to generate code and then immediately pull it into a place where they can experiment with it, where they can run it, where they can use the integrated AI tools within Replit to kind of make changes and modifications is really, really powerful. And that gives you kind of superpowers enabled by LLMs that you wouldn't have otherwise.
Got it. So the put me in the user shoes here. So what's happening? I do a search on Bard, and then what next?
Well, it wouldn't even necessarily have to be a search, right? Like you could say, so as an example, the multimodal capabilities, you could upload a screenshot of like a Python web app and say, hey, this looks really cool. How would I go about recreating this myself? And then Bard might output Python code. And then there would be a little button that pops up saying export to Replit. And you would be able to click that and sort of export the code directly to Replit.
I tested this flow with tic-tac-toe. It was extremely exciting. I took a random image from Google Images, so like a wooden tic-tac-toe, not a screenshot of an app, like a real-world version of that. And then, of course, Bart could understand the game that I was talking about and asked to implement that game in Python. So without specifically explaining that it was tic-tac-toe, it gave me a pretty decent pattern implementation, imported that on Replit with one click, maybe spent 1 minute debugging with Ghostwriter, and I was playing tic-tac-toe. Not the funniest game in the world, but
Wow. So when you think about the kind of Mark Andreessen 10 years ago, 15 years ago saying software is eating the world, this is literally taking in the world into an image, putting it into Bard, creating software out of it. That's the basic flow. Wow.
I agree. It would have changed the way in which I was writing software as a kid. I think the first time I did it, it took me maybe more than 1 day when I was learning BASIC, and now it took me a couple of clicks and a minute. So
exactly.
So this is basically like, so the logic is there too. Like, the like X's beats O. This is not just like a skin. This is not a hello world. This is more than that. Is that fair?
Logic? Yeah.
That's so interesting. And now you've inspired me to go and try something. Like I'm really jazzed about the potential of generative models to support scientists, so physicists, chemists, also mathematicians. And I think it's really interesting to think of, being able to take like an image of a physical system, like maybe a pendulum, and then like perhaps ask Bard to explain like the physics of the system. And express it as code or express it as math. I wonder if it would be able to do that. I've tried it with free body diagrams and it was able to do it. So it would be cool to see if it could do it for real world images.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like the feeling as a user is that there's so much, I guess, potential here. So on that note, tell me about the partnership itself. So right now, you mentioned it works with Python. Obviously, other languages might be a logical next step. How are you kind of thinking about that, or how are each of you thinking about that?
So we are of the opinion that we would love to see more languages supported. I know that Python, but also JavaScript, TypeScript, Bash, etc. are pretty popular on Replit. But is that something that y'all would be interested in seeing? I think we have some more export capabilities planned soon, but it would be great to have more.
I can confirm live that yes, we are very much interested. Of
Excellent.
course, Python and JavaScript and TypeScript got the lion's share in terms of utilization at Replit, but I think we have a very affectionate user base loving the long tail of exotic languages out there, and we love to support that because I'm a strong believer that programming languages are very similar to spoken languages in the sense that they come with idiosyncrasies of what people love to express. So, I have few words in Italian that I can't translate in English, for example, because of our culture. And programming languages are very much the same. Like if you're a good Haskell programmer, you probably love theory and math and so forth. And we love, to have support also for that. So when Bard is ready, we're going to import everything you give us.
Excellent. That is so cool. And one of the so it's interesting that you call out multilinguality as well. Like one of the things that we put a lot of time and energy into for Palm 2, and the kind of model that's supporting Bard today is a variant of Palm 2, with additional pre-training on a lot of source code and a lot of time and attention for instruction tuning. But Palm 2 was really unique for a number of reasons, but particularly because it had a lot of multilingual data within the pre-training data mixture. So specifically spoken language multilingual data. So around 100 spoken word languages were included as part of the initial data set. But as a result, the model seemed to have better performance on translating programming languages as well. So going from JavaScript to TypeScript, or Python to a different language, or C++ to Rust. All of these things were a little bit better than previous models that we had seen. So I'm also really jazzed about the potential of these AI integrated tools and IDEs, because software engineers are super creative, and they are doing all sorts of things that we would have never imagined. And so seeing the way that they prompt the model and the kinds of use cases that they try to enable is really eye-opening in terms of understanding the capabilities of the model itself.
Wow. So not only is being trained on code make a model itself better at logic, but conversely, being trained on many languages spoken ends up making the model better for code translation as well.
Yeah,
wow.
Or at least that's what we observed. I think that this is all still like a lot of alchemy in some ways, in the sense that it's very expensive to train these large language models. And so experimentation with proportions of data and the pre-training data mixture, experimentation with different kinds of data or different data formats or quality. It's all a little bit of a science around the data input mixtures. And right now we've seen sort of preliminary evidence that these kinds of decisions matter, that the more code that you include within the pre-training data mixture, the better it gets at math and logic and even natural language. The more multilingual data that you include, the better it gets at some of these like translation activities for code. But there's still a lot of work to do in this space, and it's really exciting.
I want to give a shout out to some of my former colleagues, because we have a paper at SML, a Babel code, which covers some of the insights that Paige was explaining. Some people were still working with you, and it is my last Google paper, so I'm very proud of that, and they're presenting it this week.
Babel code is amazing, and it was also featured in the Palm 2 technical paper, if I'm remembering correctly.
Correct. Yeah, some of the plots are coming from that framework.
Yeah, I am really I feel so fortunate that at Alphabet we have a really super strong code AI and also math AI team, and the engineers and the research scientists. I think we have over around 150 right now, maybe even more.
Wow.
But yeah, which is amazing. But they're doing such excellent work, both in terms of aggregating data, creating instruction tuning data or evals, and then also sort of brainstorming ways in which these models can be useful, not just for academic papers, but also like in a real world scenario, both internally and externally.
So you mentioned kind of this fairly surprising finding around multilingual models. I was curious, Michele, if you've seen on the Replit side, we've talked about the release of REPL 3B this spring, and we called it the YOLO run, not exactly knowing how it would perform. What surprising things did you see, and kind of what are the threads that you're pulling that you've seen in the real world data from Replit?
First of all, yeah, I remember why we called it YOLO. It was hard to understand or expect a certain outcome. It went better than I was hoping for. We made a choice in terms of a set of languages that we decided to include. partially inspired by my experience on Babel Code right before I left Google. We optimize it on the languages that are mostly represented at Replit. So there are some omissions that we would have not made in case the model was optimized for a generic usage. I would say perhaps the most surprising result we obtained was that with an additional pre-training based on data coming from our users, the performance improvement was much larger than I think anyone expected, both inside Replit and outside. And that speaks about the quality of the code that our users generate. There are not only people learning how to write Python, which we love because that's of course one large portion of our user base, but it also means there are a lot of professionals who use Replit because it's a platform where you can act quickly on very advanced libraries and features, and that helps when you train an LLM.
Absolutely.
So what about? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No worries. I was just going to say, and it's also really, really powerful that Replit, you can understand insight into the execution environment. So if somebody runs code, you can understand, like, did it actually, do what they thought it was going to do, or did it like pop out an error? Because that was one of the most frustrating things about the GitHub data sets. And you know this firsthand, is that like GitHub is the Wild West, right? Like it has so much code that does not run, that is or will not compile, that's duplicated, that has like these license removing activities for people that just like fork repos and then decide that they don't care that it has a GPL license and they'll just like take it away. Like so many problems. Dated APIs, old code, so having code that you feel really confident about, that will actually run, or that's intended to be accomplishing some task. That's one of the benefits that we have within working within Google 3. So all of our internal code is sort of similarly
Scrutinized.
Yeah. But the external code data sources they leave a lot to be desired.
Yeah, I remember when we were working on Palm Coder, we started from something very large, and by means of filtering for quality and for licensing and for all the good criteria that this data should be filtered on, like a very small fraction of that was left at the very end, and it was a painful experience, a necessary one, but it really shows you how hard it is to collect a lot of high quality data for LLMs.
Yeah, and it's the same with sort of the other data sources that you might expect to find around the internet. Like I've seen Twitter data sets, Reddit data sets, etc. But when you filter out kind of low signal data from Twitter, you're left with very, very little content to use as training data. So this is, again, like I think this entire field of study needs a lot of work. Like, how do you define what is good quality code? How do you sort of do really diligent data preprocessing techniques in order to ensure that your pre-training data is solid? And then also, how does that impact downstream performance on a variety of tasks?
Yeah, and on the flip side, one question that worries me is, where are we going to find the data very soon because of how AI is impacting some of those platforms? I think there is a Stack Overflow traffic graph that is making the rounds on Twitter in the last couple of days. I saw a thread from Nat Friedman literally like 1 hour ago where he was questioning some of those numbers, but the TLDR is Stack Overflow has experienced maybe 50-40% traffic drop since the ChatGPT and Bard of the world came out. And it means that a lot of users now are not generating valuable content online. How is that going to happen? Is it going to be only companies collecting instruction tuning data? Are we going to find data somewhere else? Is it going to be on Discord? That's an open question, I think, for everyone in the field. And it's a pressing one because data at the end of the day is the key factor for the quality of LLMs.
Absolutely.
So lots of interesting themes there. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just going to say that data is definitely the thing that will, eat all the other things. And it also makes me curious. It also makes me curious how much we might be able to rely on synthetic data generation, because for natural language and dialogue style things, it's a little bit more difficult to have kind of conversational, things that feel like they might actually have been written by a human. Whereas for programs, at least we can do like verification, static analysis checks, things to make sure that synthetic code might actually accomplish the task that you had initially designed. And then you can also recursively apply models such that even if the initial kind of like output of the model isn't perfect, you can refine it and make it better over time and extend the length of the program. So that might be something that could be considered for pre-training data augmentation long term. But in the interim, like we're running out of human data, or human created data, I should say.
Wow, that's fascinating. I mean, I remember I was at Cruise for a year, and there was a strong debates at the time over whether simulated automotive miles could actually provide sufficient training as compared with real world miles. And so curious, is it the same debate then that we're seeing here with code and with other inputs into the data models?
So I do think that it's happening not just with code, but also with other types of data that might be incorporated into pre-training. So multilinguality as a good example. Obviously English language has a massive footprint in the world, especially in the pre-training data corpus. But everybody, I feel like we're doing all of the people in the world a little bit of a disservice in that, we produce these models. We say that they have amazing performance, for text generation or whatever it might be. But what that really means is that it has amazing performance for English in these languages. And if you're coming from a different country, like that sort of makes access much more difficult. So multilingual sort of augmentation, where you have an initial bit of data that might be implemented in English, you translate it to another language, perhaps with a tool, perhaps with another large language model. You might get somebody to QC it to make sure that that's actually an accurate translation, but that could be used to support your pre-training data mixture.
Got it.
Yeah.
Michele, any thoughts on that?
I'm very hopeful about synthetic data. As you said, Cruise was discussing that. We know for a fact that Tesla has been betting a lot on that as well. They have a huge simulator, basically, of the real driving. I know a few startups that are starting to work on that, obtaining very interesting results. They also publish open source models based on synthetic data. As Paige was saying, with code, we have more potential, but it also requires quite a lot of lifting in terms of engineering, as in building these verifiers and large-scale testing is something that, for instance, Google can approach easily, and it might take us a bit longer here at Replit. So that's why we love to have this kind of collaborations, especially knowing that they have perhaps 200 people on the code AI team at this point capable of working on these problems. So they still require a lot of human effort, regardless of people thinking that software developers are gonna lose their job very soon because of AI. I have a feeling that we need more and more of them, because the problems we're attacking are more and more ambitious on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And also, the more code that we generate, the more code that has to be maintained. That's the part that scares me. Like we're enabling all of these people to realize all of the great creative work that they've been imagining. But somebody has to take care of it. And that's also the least fun part of software engineering. So the more that we can build models that can not only just generate code and explain it, but also, migrate it from one API version to another, or make sure that there's not any, sort of drift in terms of capabilities, or making sure that it's performant and that it's secure. All of these things are super, super important.
Paige, do you want to perhaps talk about, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Didact?
Oh, yeah.
I remember the internal code name. I don't know how to pronounce it outside. It's an amazing piece of work. I witnessed a short part of that, and it's one of the projects I miss receiving updates about, because I think it has immense potential. Maybe you can tell us a bit more what it does and where it's going, perhaps.
Thank you so much. And some of the authors for the Didact paper are also here this week. Some engineers and researchers from my team, Jacob Boston, Danny Tarlow, lots of folks are around if folks are curious. But it is very, very interesting in the sense that Alphabet has this massive corpus of software engineering development activity that we've accumulated over the course of multiple decades. And so what does that mean, right? Like, it means we have all of the source code within Google 3, which has ever been created to support all of Alphabet's products, which is cool. We have all of the code review that has like managed to get those CLs shepherded into production. And that has all been, like lengthy conversations. Like, if anybody's ever done code review at Google, like, it takes a while sometimes to get CLs pushed to prod. And then it's also things like execution traces, things like logs, errors, anything that happened along the way to sort of make these software systems real. And we also have even more fine-grained activity. Like, for individual developers, we know everything that they might do between looking at a bug to, testing out something to resolve it, to looking up on our internal kind of like Stack Overflow software questions and answers or other bugs that might be meaningful. We know if they like went to the MK to get a snack. Like, it's all sorts of different activity that we can stitch
MK
together.
for the non-Google initiated is micro kitchen. It's the fancy organic popcorn kitchens within Google. But yeah, I mean, I think we read
like,
oh, go ahead.
Yeah. Like MK is vitally important. And so and I would love to see a study to the effect of like, oh, if somebody is well fed, then they will like be more productive at work. But we have these very, very detailed software development histories, which when you incorporate into a pre-training data corpus, super high quality, very unique, kind of the sum total of all of the engineers that have ever worked at Google, which I feel very blessed, or continue to be lots of very brainy people, and sort of incorporating that into a model's continued pre-training means that suddenly you have effectively the equivalent of an L5 Google Suite, or sometimes even better, and it can do everything from code generation to code explanation. It can make performance recommendations. It can help with debugging. It can you can give it a bug, and it can sort of recommend what would be required in order to like submit a CL to resolve it. All sorts of stuff, and so that I think has massive potential. I don't know of any software system externally that has that kind of data set today. However, if a company was enterprising and wanted to build such a data set, it would be very, 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 very impactful, and would certainly be able to unlock similar capabilities for people outside of Alphabet.
So the reason why I brought it, oh, sorry.
Please.
One short additional comment. The reason why I brought this up, Paige, is first of all, I love the work. I recommend everyone to check the blog post because it's super inspiring how powerful the system is. What we have at Replit is a much wider subset of the data. Let me elaborate what I mean by that. Is we have, of course, plenty more users compared to the very large number of software engineers that are still at Google. But our data is more unsupervised to an extent, in the sense that we don't collect code reviews. We don't have all the high quality historical data about how code has evolved, but we have very fine-grained data about every REPL has evolved over its lifetime. And we're working in applying, basically in building a subset of what data can do for single REPLs. It's possibly one of the most ambitious things we're working on internally. But I was very inspired by that work, and I felt we need to try to give the same to our users in the near future.
Yeah, and we miss the heck out of you, by the way. Like, it's the Alphabet is very excited and very fortunate to have you as a collaborator, even outside of the company boundaries. But
thank you. I appreciate it.
There's so much good work to do. And there's so much that is exciting about code generation in particular, and code maintenance. So this is, there couldn't be a more interesting time to be working in this space.
Yeah, I always feel blessed that we work in this space. I don't take that for granted.
Yep.
Good stuff. So on that note of kind of maintenance and sort of what the work the world at large has to do in this area, Can you each say, or maybe I'll start with you, Michele, can you say how you see open source impacting progress here? Obviously, the release of Llama 2 recently has gotten, a ton of press, people talking about the possibilities. Say a little bit about that.
The thing I'm most excited about in terms of open source models, and I know this is going to sound a bit controversial, are not the models per se, because there is always going to be something more powerful literally a week from today. I'm more excited about the ecosystem that is evolving around them, namely all the libraries and frameworks and more efficient ways of doing inference on models that are growing regardless of how powerful a model is today. And that's such a trove. It's a gold mine of intellect that the wider community is pouring on the problem. I don't know how many players are going to be in the LLM space. I think any prediction in AI turns out to be wildly false in the future. So I don't like to say anything like that. I think that perhaps on the very large models, there will be an oligopoly, and that's how it should be. Like they require a lot of capital. I think there will be a long tail of powerful enough LLMs that are easier to serve, and they will enable a lot of interesting use cases. But at the end of the day, what I found exciting is that a lot of people are building applications and products on top of this technology. And that's what impacts users at the end of the day. It's not the palms of the world, the bards of the world are what are impacting the users. Palm is exciting for people like us that are more on the research side, and we first see something working, and it's the most mind-blowing experience for someone who has a research background. But then the product is what makes the field famous and impactful towards people. So that's what I love about these last 9 months that have been happening in the Gen AI space, because we got an increase of number of people building, and I don't see this stopping ever. Or at least it's not going to slow down substantially. That's my only prediction for today.
How about you, Paige? What are you seeing in open source, and how is open source advancing the state of the art?
Absolutely. So top of mind and top of discussion topics for this week at ICML is Llama 2. It feels like everybody's been experimenting with it. I was playing with it in Colab this morning, but it's very powerful. It also has a relatively permissive license. So if you're a startup and you have less than 700 million monthly actives, which is basically every company in the world, then you're capable of using it commercially. And it comes in a variety of sizes. So smaller sizes that might be useful for things like code completions or kind of instances where you don't want high latency for your responses. I think also like a on the order of tens of billions of parameters variant, and then also a much larger variant on the order of like 60 or 70 billion parameters. I forget which one. But given that there are
33 and a 70, if I recall correctly, those are the two largest ones. Yeah.
Excellent.
And like a grande, a venti, etc. Okay. Right.
Exactly, like the Starbucks coffees. Yeah.
Small medium bags, and like it's so interesting too, because two things that I was quite nervous about whenever large language models came out and so much of the discussion became proprietary and kind of need to know only and fewer publications, was that right now these large language models are being built in a very small number of places. So if you want to know how to do this, you can't really go to university and learn. You can't really, go to any company and learn. Like, you have to get into one of these research labs that are building the models, which means that feels a little bit like, it's a roll of the dice as to whether you might be able to join that company and actually get involved with the model training program, because usually the teams try to, keep pretty concise. And so if you do see these models released, then suddenly, like, the pedagogy of building these large models is accessible to more and more people. So they can learn how they might be architected, what the constraints might be, what the discussion was for all of the code that was created. They can sort of brainstorm what might be better options, especially for students in this space. This is huge. And as they're preparing to either go into industry or to build out their own startups, or to even imagine variants on transformer architectures, because hopefully we have something that looks a little bit different, a couple of years from now, if that, sort of makes the most sense. But that's really powerful. And then I think also in terms of having full access to the checkpoints, you can do really interesting things around continued pre-training that otherwise would not be possible. So one thing that I would love to see, because like when I started experimenting with Llama 2, the first thing that I was testing was code stuff, because obviously, and like the performance for some of the like code explanation, code generation left a little bit to be desired. It would be awesome if somebody took Llama 2 and did continued pre-training on a whole bunch of publicly available source code and then made that version available. So like a code llama or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet. I was making bets that it would have happened within the first week. I think it has to happen sooner than later. So
yeah, somebody has to do it. And because right now I just saw this morning, like Llama 2 available on Hugging Face. The Big Code project has, data sets available on Hugging Face. Like somebody
sounds like a challenge. Sounds like a challenge.
Yeah.
So one of our listeners, I guess we can place a bet. If you email us or add us on our Twitter, which we're active there right now, that you're working on this project, we will absolutely check it out, and hopefully it'll advance the state of the art. That's where I was going to go. Is like, what do you see, Michele, like with this data set out, is the or this model out, is the sky the limit? Can somebody come up with comparable apps to what we're seeing built on, Bard or OpenAI's stuff using Llama?
I think on niches, we already see that, like on specific verticals, especially thanks to how powerful instruct tuning has become. You can really build something as good as the generalist models. The other thing that I'm excited about, which is echoing what Paige was saying, not only we're open sourcing models, but we're also starting to open source LLM datasets. What basically the pile did initially from Luther, then we have seen Red Pajama, we have been seeing Refined Web from Falcon, we're seeing a few variations of these datasets. What that allows is for startups and universities that have access to enough resources, which I think is something that slowly, as a whole, we are fixing both in the US and in Europe. Students now, PhDs, can basically start to train novel architectures exactly on the same data set. So everything is a fixed point except the architecture. And the next attention is to the need paper doesn't have to necessarily come out of Google. Of course, I hope for my former colleague that is going to be the case. But at the end of the day, as a field, if the next big architecture comes from anywhere, what counts is that we are going to have it available to anyone. And this is something that I didn't experience when I started my research career, and it's completely different today. And that's what I'm excited about. Not only the fact that Llama is available, but the fact that the recipes on how to build these models are accessible to anyone. And like, people are creative out there, way more than we all expect. So let's see what they're going to do with all of this.
Yeah, on that note, with people being creative and kind of, where do you see like an AI developer ecosystem happening? And maybe it's a model developer ecosystem, but you put out data recently at Replit that we saw, I think it was like 34,000% increase in AI apps. Obviously we're all on Twitter. We're having this conversation basically on Twitter. There's Cerebral Valley here in San Francisco. I'm getting invites to, 3 events a day, which are fabulous. And, you probably, Michele, you mentioned you don't pay for dinner almost any night because you've got all these meetups. But where do you see kind of the developer ecosystem happening with AI? And obviously Google, same thing, strong history of promoting open ecosystems. Where do you see that progress?
You mean in terms of, sorry, Paige, go ahead. You might have a better answer than me for sure.
No, I disagree. Like I was going to ask a clarifying question too. I think that one of the most interesting potential outcomes of this generative AI explosion is that we can move past people feeling like they need to implement code towards just making it easier for them to have an idea, to articulate it, and then to see it realized and to tweak it perhaps a little bit if the output is incorrect. I'm also really jazzed about the potential of there are all these conversations about, will all of these engineers will be out of a job or something similar. And I think that's completely not the case.
Yeah.
Like, if anything, we're going to be opening up the potential to be engineers to billions of people, as opposed to just the handful of millions that we have currently. Because, people in the biosciences, the physical sciences, the natural sciences, they have to analyze massive amounts of data in order to do their job. And right now that requires Python tools, which is asking them to get, a degree in computer science or a degree in data science, in addition to the other degrees that they've accumulated over time. So if anything, just opening up software engineering, data analysis to people who normally would not have those superpowers is something that I'm particularly jazzed about. Like, I want the software engineering community to have a Cambrian explosion, just as we're seeing the Cambrian explosion of AI apps. Everyone should be able to build technical things and to be able to realize their ideas and their sort of all of these great sort of projects that they've been hoping to create, even if they don't necessarily have a software engineering background.
Yeah, as you know, one of the punchlines of our company is empowering the next billion software developers. So we couldn't agree more with your analysis. And
Excellent.
by the way, just adding some flavor to that statement, we talk a lot as a field of how much we can make developers more productive. And of course, it's a very interesting metric, don't get me wrong. We try to analyze that in several different ways. I think Google has their own metrics that they've been published for the Paige. Tell me what is the public-facing name of the project of the code completion that was announced 1 year ago.
Oh, so there's Cody, which is the model name, and then there's also Duet for developers, which is the cloud sort of software for all of the developer tools.
Perfect. So on those projects, Google has a blog post about it. Of course, GitHub is also metrics about how Copilot makes their developers more productive. The same we experience at Replit. In my humble opinion, though, we are putting the focus perhaps not on the most important dimension of growth. And for me, the horizontal growth is the most important. Basically what Paige was saying, the fact that way more people are going to be empowered in writing software. So even if we don't manage to make developers 10x more productive in the next 3 years, but if we get 100 million more, that's such a big net benefit that that's some better growth direction compared to making the single developer more productive. And I'm more excited about making this technology more accessible to people without a computer science degree, rather than making like a net 6 at Google 15% more productive. They're already amazing as they are. So it's not going to be life-changing for them to be even more amazing.
Absolutely. And do you remember, like, I feel like all of us have more or less the same story, which is like growing up and then finding computers and sort of realizing that they can do all of these things, and just having like this mind blown sort of situation, like finding out you can create text adventure games. It's just like, what? Like, just this completely empowering experience. And I want that, and I want it for everyone. For them to be able to feel like they're, they don't have to just be consumers of digital artifacts. They can also be, creators of anything they can want to build.
Yeah, very true. As we have a lot of content creators out there today, we want to see a lot of code creators and software creators as well. And I think that's bound to happen sooner than people expect.
Yep.
So we've seen, Ghostwriter, which is Replit's generative AI for coding, it's been out going on almost a year at this point. Michele, what are some learnings you've had from that? Like, are you seeing this kind of horizontal, everyone's a creator sort of like increase in these mind-blown moments? Any stories or surprising facts you might have seen that the audience may have interest in?
Yeah, let me try to pick maybe a top 2 or 3 in my mind, first of all. Maybe I can pick a technical one and a non-technical one. The technical one I'm excited about is when we started to decide the design of the code completion. And by the way, I wasn't here yet, and I was just chatting with Amjad and some of you. I like the fact that our code completion has a much lower latency compared to some of the other products out there. And in a sense, rather than competing, head to head and trying to mimic products that already exist, there is so much room to try different recipes and see which one of them stick or which one of them make users happy. That I like the fact that Replit made a very bold choice in going with something, perhaps a bit less powerful, but lower latency with a different size of the code completion. It turns out that the users loved it regardless, or perhaps even more depending on how our user base looks like today. So that taught me even back then that some of the dogmas that we follow in the AI space today, because arguably there are not many successful AI products yet. I think we're learning as a field on how to put Gen AI in front of users. Not necessarily we need to follow these dogmas. Like we can be daring because it's a green pasture. So we can try different things. And it turns out that as long as the experience is delightful and magic for the user, they're going to be there and they're going to love it. So this is my more technical insight, perhaps from the past few months. The non-technical is that I'm looking at some of the people working during our hackathons, or also like I go to many hackathons to get free dinners, as we were making jokes about before. But jokes aside, I go there, I judge some of the projects, I see people building a Replit, and I realize that plenty of them are not coming from a technical background, but they are empowered by the fact that we have both code completion and we have Ghostwriter as a code assistant that pretty much handholds you throughout the whole process, so like the life cycle of the software you're building. And that is really empowering people that are creative. They know how to express themselves very well, perhaps much better than I do coming from a software background. And it turns out that they build perhaps the projects that usually win those hackathons, because they have a good understanding of what's something creative that people will love to use. And now they finally found the tool to make that work. It's like we gave a paintbrush, in the hand of a person who's very artistic. If you give me a paintbrush today, I wouldn't know what to do with it. I'm very bad at that. But there are people out there that have a lot of artistic sense when it comes to software. They didn't know how to make it work back then. And now the technology that we're all building as a field is empowering them. And they're actually making it happen. Like, again, faster than I expected. And we have this example, Priya, one of the PMs who's coming here, attending all our hackathons, that she's been winning a lot of these events in the past few months. And I've seen these people working in front of the IDE, and it's amazing to see how different is the mindset compared to how I write code, but they're still extremely effective. So again, there is not only one way to be a good software developer, clearly, especially now that we have AI.
Yep.
Paige, does that match kind of how you're seeing things?
Absolutely. Like the having the ability to sort of take either single, product-minded folks and give them the tools and the expertise that they need in order to create demos or first prototypes that could win them, whatever kind of software engineering support they would need in order to actually get it into production, or to persuade potential investors to invest in a company. That's huge. And if you look at the relative sizes of startups that are being launched right now, it's not on the order of dozens of people anymore. It's on the order of like 2 to 8, I would say, like certainly less than 10. And all of those people are able to kind of be much more effective at their jobs. But more creative and more user focused, because you don't have to necessarily worry about writing boilerplate code or about like all of the weirdnesses of like config files. You can just focus on problems and how you might be able to solve them. And for the right kind of creative, empathetic, user focused humans, there's nothing more exciting than you could think about as a workplace or a career.
Yeah, I'm impressed that your answer was quite aligned with your Twitter bio, which says AI should be about empowering people and building understanding, which is basically
Yes.
kind of basically what you just said. So
Love it.
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, what let's see. Let me turn. We had some audience questions submitted, and we've got a listener curious about fine tuning. So have you considered, Replit, or I guess Google, considered allowing the underlying models to be fine tuned by paying customers, or where do you see this sort of personalization going? Michele, you talked about, small models are the new big. Do you see that kind of model selection or tuning becoming a product in itself?
All right, I think twofold answer. The first one, we released the base model open source, and as a matter of fact, we have seen a lot of fine-tuned forks, both with additional data, with instruction tuning data, and with synthetic data. That was probably the best Replit fork that we have seen, just to connect to what we were discussing at the beginning of the podcast. So definitely putting open source models of this size, like a Replit 3B or a Llama 7B, allows the community to become even more creative on these very advanced techniques. So there is that side of the fine tuning. Perhaps also the question here is about LoRa, or like parameter efficient fine tuning techniques that allow pretty much every user to have their own customized version of an LLM. I'm extremely excited about them. I hope that's where the future is bringing us. They are still not easy to deploy in production. I think this is an open challenge for pretty much even the big companies out there. But like anything that has potentially a lot of impact and it's only a technical problem, let me put it in quotes because it's a very hard one, eventually technical problems are cracked. And then we're going to start to see models that are very much customized towards what a user wants to do on that specific product. And Replit will tag along immediately the moment that is available. So I'm keeping my eyes open when it becomes accessible also to a company like ours.
Yep.
What's the pain though? Just to paint a picture for the listeners. What is the pain with deploying a model today? Just in summary.
Sure. Models are expensive to serve for several reasons. One of them is they require accelerators, so they require dedicated hardware to have the latency that the user would expect. If you run them on CPU, which are much cheaper, they are way too slow for a good user experience. And at the same time, models are also hard to train, especially the large ones. Mm-hmm. And for lower latency, there is always a trade-off between the size of the model and how much a user is willing to wait. So these are all the different tunable that we have in our hands to craft the user experience. But it also means that it's not easy to give access to Gen AI as it is to give access to a web service 10 years ago. And this is not going to change very quickly. The technology is improving a lot. The hardware is improving a lot. But like anything is bound by the laws of physics. So we're not going to be getting like orders of magnitude in 6 months. And all in a sudden, the problem becomes trivial. But we're getting there, and parameter efficient tuning is possibly one way to make that happen, which means rather than changing completely the shape and the weights of a network, you rather change a few tiny bits here and there in order to personalize the model for the user. We know the theory, we know ways to make that happen. It's still not exactly trivial to do it in production in front of millions of users, such as what Replit and Bard face on a daily basis.
To that point, I will say that we are planning a sort of custom fine-tuning extension of our Vertex AI APIs to be launched later this year. So users would have the ability to do precisely what you just described, which is point at Wonderful. Sort of personalized data sets and fine-tune the model and get a very unique REST API endpoint that you could call, and it might be like a Replit flavored version of Palm 2 or a Replit flavored version of whatever model happens to be the model du jour. And that is very compelling. And I do agree that it doesn't solve many of the problems, though, because you still have to have really good data that's used for the fine tuning. You still have to take a lot of care and consideration for it. You still might have to do additional instruction tuning that might be company specific. So if you have, so as an example, if your company is sort of working within languages that are less popular, like I don't know, like NASA working with Fortran or something, then they might need to do code instruction tuning with a lot of Fortran examples, even if they did the custom fine tuning on their internal code bases. So it's very, very interesting to think about that we've come so far, that we have all of these tools that we would have never expected a couple of years ago, but there's also still so much work left to do. And data is always the hardest part.
Right. Yes. Yeah. We talked about that. All right. What so we're getting to time. Let me see that one other question we got from the audience was back to the original Bard Replit partnership. This person was curious if the partnership has particular advantages in kind of a remote world, or, you know, if there's anything in terms of looking at this as a productivity unlock or as a capability unlock of not only can you get advice on what to do, but you can get the actual code and run it. How does that match up with some of the trends we've been seeing, including remote first and including kind of the creator economy and sort of all these sort of macro trends of personalization? Any insight there?
Yeah, I do think that often the engineers that are most hurt by remote first work, or at least that might be at a disadvantage from remote first work, are junior engineers. So senior engineers, you know, they've kind of seen all the skeletons, like they know what to do. You know, you just send them home and they're capable of shipping CLs all day. For junior developers, especially if you're coming up to speed with a new code base, it's much trickier to kind of understand, you know, why were some of these decisions made? What is this code actually doing? You know, if I was going to implement a new feature, where should I put it actually? And I feel like these kinds of, you know, safe places to ask, you know, potentially junior questions, or they are, or kind of novice focused questions, or questions when you might just be getting up to speed. They are very powerful. And so if you can give Bard or something like Bard a code snippet, ask it to be kind of a thought partner or helpful, you know, somebody that can get you to a question where you could ask a more senior colleague, or to make an initial CL. I think that's really huge.
Yeah, I remember early in my career, I had a boss who was hyper responsive to any question, and it was so helpful. It was like I used to think that they were like an ATM, like I could ask and it was like, boom, here's the answer, and it was just like every, you know, getting unblocked, and sometimes it would be a question back, you know, which was also helpful. But yeah, no, that's a fascinating insight. Great. Okay. Well, I've really enjoyed the conversation today. Anything else to share with our listeners? What's upcoming in AI at Google? What can we look out for with Bard and with this partnership?
Definitely watch for the Gemini models. We're very excited about them. They'll be the first models that Google DeepMind has trained jointly as Legacy Brain and Legacy DeepMind. And then also, I think the sort of broader spectrum of code AI tools is going to grow pretty significantly in the next couple of quarters. So be watchful for that as well.
Wow. Okay. Great. And then we had someone comment on our Twitter, being able to build technical tools without a CS degree is massive. Never learned how to code, but built so much automation workflow scripts over the last 6 months using ChatGPT. Learn more about Python, JavaScript doing that than I ever did, failing to read through a beginner's tutorial. So fascinating. I think there's a kind of a, you know, learning, I think, has a you know, a little bit of a connotation, right? Of like, oh, I'm a learner or a student. Nobody wants to call themselves a student. But if it's really just somebody looking to achieve a task, like that feels like the big unlock here, that it's like that line between sort of like I'm in a classroom versus, no, actually I have software I want to make. I want to take a picture of a tic-tac-toe game and turn my world into software. Like anyone being able to do that. I think that's been the most fascinating part of the conversation today. Any insights, Michele, on what we can look out for from Replit in the next month or so? I guess we'll talk again in a month in the AI podcast in a month. But what can you tell us to look out for?
Look out at Ghostwriter. We're doing a lot of work under the hood, and then there's going to be an announcement happening perhaps in the next 4 weeks. I don't want to put too much pressure on the team, but we're working very hard for the next version of Ghostwriter.
Excellent.
Well, we're live, so I can't do an eyes emoji, but if I could, that's what I would do. So very exciting. All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you, Paige, for taking the time to speak to us from ICML. It's been a pleasure as always. Michele, thank you. Please do continue the conversation on Twitter. Like, we are excited. I hope you can tell our sort of palpable excitement about AI, as well as like the actual building. Like, that's kind of day to day. We're out there, we're researching, we're building, we're iterating with users. So please tag us. We're doing lots of user research, of course, hashtag hiring, because we're always hiring, but please do continue the conversation. And we're super excited to have you as a listener and have the AI community gathered here. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.